there's sort of a limited outer landscape going on.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. So in any case, let me ask you, what inspired you to want to create this work?
well, for one, I started speaking with a former mentor of mine who runs a graduate department in theater, Dr. Maureen Barnes, and she and I were discussing this one night over dinner and talking about the senses and how the senses intermix at times and how that is a very profound experience for some people. And in this day and age of technology, that we're often, just turned off to what is around us because we're in the technology, in the phone, or in the computer. And then I started, speaking to her more about it. I thought, wow, I started remembering these sensory experiences and moments, from when I was younger, where I was really in touch with nature or people, or and I think we moved away from that more. And so for me, it was the death of my mother and my grandfather in the same few months. It was a massive loss for me personally, and so I started to become sort of very closed down to my senses, and I literally saw whites and grays and colors and things that sounded more harsh or more, the things I experienced as a synesthetic started to change, and it kind of frightened me a little bit. It was a very strange experience. And I wondered if anyone else felt that way as well. And so, I really haven't met many synesthetics in my life. There's been very few. I can probably count them on one hand. True synesthetics that I've actually met, in my personal life. So I became very excited when I started to read the work about it, because I thought, oh, there's other people like me. I'm not alone. This is wonderful. And also to share it with people who might, be interested in it, who don't maybe have the condition, but are fascinated by the way it informs creativity, the way it informs the arts and writing and painting and creating, and or just the way you perceive the world. The way that you decide to get in touch with yourself in a different way, and to relate to the world in a different way. So, yeah.
In my case, what I really identified with personally was you talk about colored letters, you talk about colored words, and this is what I experienced. But I think it goes beyond colors. I think there's also a sense of an environment with synesthesia, which I think is something you try to create in your work, this feeling of an environment. I interviewed so many different synesthetes when I was writing my book, and apart from describing the particular blended sensations that they experience, they also usually describe a kind of environment. Many times, for example, synesthetes who experience word-color synesthesia will also talk about how their colored alphabets have this kind of very definite spatial dimension. In my case, I kind of feel like I'm like the colored letters exist on a sort of upwardly mobile trail. It's like a colored alphabet trail. And I sort of have a position on this trail. I'm kind of like, my default position is at the bottom of the trail between this very big orange A and very big green B. And then there's like a navy blue C, and then there's a chocolate brown D, and then there's like a lipstick red E. And I won't go through all 26, don't worry. But anyway, as I can kind of look up the trail, and I can sort of see the letters are kind of receding into the distance, just as if you looked up any trail, right? That's how it would be. But if I'm writing something, I have the feeling of actually being on this trail. And if I'm considering this or that word as I'm writing, I can sort of glide up the trail. I can stand next to this or that letter. This is all going on internally, by the way. It's not a kind of outward hallucination, but it's definitely a very active sort of inner environment that I think helps me. I think it actually helps me to focus as I'm writing. And this is something that I found in interviewing synesthetes, that they very often describe this spatial sense of an environment. I remember a composer that I interviewed, Michael Torkey, who used to compose music for the New York City Ballet. And in fact, he wrote a series of colored ballets because he experienced colored music. And he said that when he composes, in his case, musical keys had color. And he said, when I compose, I feel like I'm swimming in that particular color. If I'm composing in the key of D, I'm kind of swimming in orange. Or if I'm composing in the key of G, which I think for him was green, he wrote something called Green Symphony, which was in the key of G, I feel like, I'm in a green room. And so there was this sense of being surrounded by this particular color that helped him to really focus and examine that sensory experience, and then allowed him maybe to compose better and put it into his music. So I think that this is maybe an aspect of synesthesia that could be better studied, is this feeling of a landscape, this feeling of an environment. And I think painters like Carol, that try to kind of bring that landscape out and show it on the canvas. This is something that's very beautiful, and I think also inspiring, because I think as you listen, if we listen to descriptions of other people's inner landscapes, you sort of can't help but think about your own, right? Well, how do I, even if yours might or might not take this kind of blended synesthetic form, but we all have a very, very unique sort of inner landscape, a way that we sort of code knowledge internally. Maybe it's a visual way, maybe it's something that we hear, maybe it's a kind of soundscape, or maybe it's a blending of those. But I think it can be really useful for everybody to just sort of get more in touch with whatever that inner landscape is. Because that's sort of our inner world of knowledge, that's kind of the world that's where the learning takes place, is how do we incorporate new things that we learn or new ideas that we have. What sort of sensory form do they take? So I think that in talking about synesthesia, it kind of brings up the fact that we're all processing information in such a very unique way, right? There's not sort of just one way of processing language or processing music or processing. There's many, many different possible cross activations, and this has so many implications for how we learn. How we should be teaching children, how we should be sensitive to how different children might learn differently. So I think that the study of synesthesia has really opened a kind of door to so many different things, and it becomes a really very important area of study for that reason. I'll be quiet.
That was wonderful. Oh my gosh, please keep going.
Well, let's open it up to you all. Questions you can ask about the show or about synesthesia? Yes.
Hi, I was just wondering if you guys ever found that synesthesia and seeing these colors has ever gotten in the way of your writing or creating, as opposed to aiding it, as you said, that it sometimes helps you focus? Like at first, did it get in the way or confuse you in any way?
No, I mean, ever since I can remember, I've had this experience, so I almost don't know any other way to think about words or to experience them. So when I was a little girl, before I knew how to read or write, each word, every time I heard a word, it would have its own very particular colorful design, like a kind of kaleidoscopic pattern. And that would just happen absolutely automatically. I couldn't change it. And sometimes when I was a little girl, I did try to draw these word designs. Then I think probably what happened was when I went to school, and you then learn this shared representation, right? You learn how to write, and you learn how to read, and you learn this whole other visual way of representing language. And then I think that probably began to replace this other one. But maybe I took some elements of that original one, and so that's why letters and words had to take on this kind of color. I don't find it a distraction. I think if you have developed what's called developmental synesthesia, which means ever since you can remember, you've had this experience. You feel like you were just born this way. Usually it becomes sort of very well integrated into general perception, and it doesn't get in the way. However, if you have something called acquired synesthesia, which means maybe you have a head injury, and suddenly words will start to take on, you hear words and they suddenly have colors but they never did before. That will be very distracting, because that particular person wasn't able to sort of grow up as a child somehow integrating all of these experiences. All of that said, I will say that sometimes walking into, when it comes to sort of random sounds, like, for example, going into a very, very noisy place, that I find very difficult. You know, walking into a restaurant or a bar that's where everybody's talking and there's loud music playing, I'm sort of getting too many different visual, you know, just immediate sort of visual representations in my head, and it becomes kind of unpleasant. So to that extent, if I think of that kind of experience, you know, that becomes a bit unpleasant and distracting. But the experience of writing or reading, no, I don't find the colors. People often ask me that though. You know, do the colors get in the way?
Right.
But I would say no. In my case, no. I was a very good speller. Yes.
How about you, Natasha?
I tend to remember certain things better, more clearly because of the aspect of the personality or the color. So for instance, if you tell me your phone number, I can probably remember it, you know, fairly well because I know what each digit's personality is. And, you know, shade and all that. So it's like, oh, okay, you're a 267, 243, blah, blah, you know. So the other thing where it gets in the way for me, Aiden, is where I have an aversion to certain patterns. For instance, they're loud to me. So if I, in my apartment, it's very neutral. I can't have sheets that are too patterned and bright because I actually hear noise, and I know that sounds, you know, but and so I have to have certain colors and very basic colors, very neutral colors, or I feel very chaotic in my home. The other thing is loud noises, busy places, sitting in a place where there's a lot of commotion. I start to actually have sometimes even like a physical reaction where I feel ill or I feel it's very, very extreme. And I couldn't understand for a long time as a young person why I couldn't watch certain horror movies or certain things because I have the empath level that of synesthesia where it hits me very emotionally. So if I see something very violent or very, you know, also I think that in the conversely, it's a juxtaposition for me in my work artistically because I'm a fight choreographer, I'm a director, I'm an actor, I'm a writer. So, you know, if I'm feeling something, that can be very good, you know, because I'm feeling it much more easily than other people are feeling it. So, you know, if I'm doing scene work with a partner, it's not hard for me to access, you know, and mirror that person or have a Meisner type of, you know, a repetitious effect with that person because it just happens. So I have to kind of monitor it. And for a while, you know, I thought maybe I need medication or something, you know, it's like that extreme. I've learned to sort of embrace it and kind of, you know, I mean, to use it, to focus it. But yeah, just feeling overwhelmed, feeling chaotic. I think those are words
I think that's a word, yeah, a lot of synesthetes would use to describe. Sometimes it's kind of sensory overload occasionally. Yeah, that's true.
Others?
Any others? Carol, would you want to jump in here and talk about your form of synesthesia or anything that struck you in the play?
I just wanted to address your comment about does it get in your way? You have to understand we don't have a choice. It's how we perceive it. Pat will describe the colors of her letters, which are wrong, of course.
Yes, I agree with that.
But everything else she's describing is absolutely accurate.
Okay.
But the thing is, the synesthetes don't agree on anything, except that we recognize that we can do the same kinds of things, and then we get down to the 5-year-old level of I'm right, you're wrong, and we play. Because when you're growing up with this, when I was growing up with this, when Pat was growing up with this, when you were growing up with this, there wasn't a lot of information out there, and you said that you were different. Somehow you were putting yourself in a category of I'm not as good as you. There must be something wrong with me because I don't see what you see. And isn't that really how we judge each other? We're friends, you bring this guy home, you're really in love with him, your mother says, what?
She doesn't see what you see.
No.
Yeah, and there are some issues. So if you were different from other people, it became kind of a problem. And many people growing up with synesthesia, even now, feel very much alone. They think, I'm the only one experiencing this, therefore, I must be crazy. Or, there's something wrong with the rest of you. Which is a different point of view. So when synesthetes get together and they meet for the first time and they kind of tentatively say, oh, you have colored letters, what color is, and you name a letter, and you don't get the same color in response. It's like you now can be 5 years old and passionately defend the brightness of your colors and expect to play. So it's no longer you're different, therefore there's something wrong with you. It's somebody else can do what you can.
Yeah, no, it's very, very,
And
wonderful
that's just
experience, actually, to
really
meet somebody else.
fantastic.
Yeah, like you were saying.
They also say, and they is, well, Simon Baron Cohen at the University of Cambridge and Ramachandran at the University of California, San Diego, Raymond Carlucci Center. They both said, if you're a synesthete, you're 7 times more likely to go into one of the arts, which I think is amazing. And it makes perfect sense because what we see is actually so beautiful. You know, everyone's focused on, you do something the rest of us can't see, and those of us who can see it are going, oh my God, how can I show people what this is like? This is just gorgeous. And so you go into the arts because if it's so good, you want more of it. And then you find a whole bunch of people who have these many different forms. Sound could be in color, taste could be in color. Do you know that perfumer, Jo Malone? Oh, go smell her fragrances. She's a synesthete. Yeah, it's amazing. She's sold at places like Bloomingdale's, English perfume designer.
Was she here tonight? Was she
No.
here? Was she?
No, I don't know what she does. I don't know the form. But there's so many forms of it. Pat's got one she hasn't really talked about. I tease her is because I don't have it. I don't know what she does. But she can position herself in space, and the days of the week open up for her. You should talk about your.
Well, it's, let's say that another common form of synesthesia, it's actually pretty common, is having colors for the days of the week. And that's usually accompanied by a kind of landscape, too.
Absolutely. And they're
Yeah.
in
Do
a
you
shape.
feel that?
Oh, yeah, and
Oh.
the days of the week and the year are the year is a circle.
Exactly.
I'm in the
It's
way.
oblong, but that's okay.
And it's a circle, and we're right here on the circle right now, and they definitely have, it's more shaped than colors,
Uh-huh.
and the colors tend to be more traditional. I see this is a
Is
white.
it smoky or is it very clear?
The color? Oh, it's very clear.
Very good. See, very, see,
And-
he knows he can see.
How are the months represented on the, I mean,
It's a circle, and they each have their own little
like
part of the graph.
little kind of territory, like.
Yeah, little segments,
Yes,
and even there's certain
exactly.
things that are marked definite in the circle. July 1st is a definite date.
Mhm. And a definite place, right? It has a definite position
Definite place never moves.
on that circle, it doesn't move.
And I remember all of my history of everything that happens. I know what part of that circle it happened. She was born right over here.
Ah, did you know you were born right over there? Did you see your father?
In the light blue.
Can I ask you a question? Bill
But I don't see
Zimmer-
letter colors, but.
Yeah, Bill Zimmer was a New York Times critic, art critic. He unfortunately died, but I met him one day. I'd known him for years, and we were talking synesthesia, and we were both so new to it, so tentative, and he confessed that certain time periods were a shape, and then the time like noon to 4 would be another shape, and then Do you do that?
I, not so much shapes, but I definitely see time as there's
Yeah,
this time you're supposed to sleep, there's a morning time.
yes,
There's noon is a peak,
yeah.
then dinner time is, 6 o'clock is another peak.
It goes
6
up.
to 10 p.m. is another peak. 10 to midnight is a section of time, and then midnight to 6 a.m. is a section.
And what happens when you go to the next day?
Oh, you basically turn the page, and I'm also at the end of the week, so that means Sunday is up here, so we're getting ready to start our Monday, which actually goes down.
I say you turn a page, I have to just like cross a border.
Yeah, mine's more, I feel like I'm turning the page. I've always related that to, that's, and I don't like calendars or anything that doesn't match what I'm thinking.
Right, I know what you
Yeah.
mean. I know what you mean. It's not, it doesn't match the internal calendar, let's say, right? It doesn't, yeah.
I had a really hard time going to computer calendars because they didn't match
Right.
what I visualized.
But it sounds like your, this sort of inner landscape that you have, it helps you to remember things. We were talking before about how this is sort of where the learning takes place, right? It's how you are coding it inwardly. That's how you remember things that you learn. So, so certain particular periods of history, right, would occupy like a very definite place in that environment. So this is a useful tool to have. Yeah. And Carol was saying something before about how, very little was known about, I mean, it's wonderful that, that this new generation, right, is making performances about synesthesia, and people are talking about it. When I was growing up, when Carol was growing up, nobody even knew what that was. I knew what my experience was, but I didn't know there was a word for that. And in fact, I thought everybody saw words in color for a long time, which is what a lot of synesthetes
assume
say.
that
You just think everybody sees what you see. And then you
It's very
realize.
disappointing to realize that. Especially because my name is Natasha, so I had to spell it all the time in kindergarten, and no one else saw.
Do you have any letters for which the color doesn't exist in what you can see, which you could point to?
Yes, 0. When I talked about 0, he is very clear, and he can be any color of something passing behind him or in front of him. He's completely clear, and he has a thin black line around on each side. Like, so the middle of him is a little thin line, and then the outer edge, and he's very sort of dainty and delicate, and if he were to be dropped on the ground, he would shatter.
Like Humpty Dumpty.
Yes. And actually, I skipped a whole section tonight, a little bit, about days of the week and how I see days of the week and how it's like a graph stretched out in front of me like this. And it moves, so like Tuesday, if you ask me what I'm doing next Tuesday, I see Monday, Tuesday, it's a little square, and it's dark, 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 like eggplant, violet kind of hue. And then it moves close to me if I'm thinking about what I'm gonna do. So if you tell me you're gonna meet me Tuesday at 3 o'clock, I see 3 o'clock as red, like a bright, bright, vibrant red. So 3 o'clock moves down to the time of day, it moves, because it's after 12 o'clock, so it's lower.
Yeah. I know what
So,
you
so it moves down, and then the graph goes like this, it moves in space, and then it gets larger, so I see the whole day. Zooming in, that's what I talk about, zooming in.
Yeah.
And then Tuesday is darker if I have a lot of plans, and lighter if most of the day is empty. So if I'm only meeting you at 3 o'clock, and then I'm only having dinner and then going home, everything around 3 o'clock, before 3 o'clock, is sort of almost like white. It gets very vibrant, it's empty. And then the rest of it gets darker as it gets more packed.
Right.
So it gets a darker color, purple, dark, 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 even to black if I'm like really hectic and really busy. And then if you ask me, okay, let's not meet Tuesday, let's meet next year in 2016 in June, then I see I see squares for the months, so like January, February, March, April, same thing. Like this, and then it moves like this, and I see June. And then I see the days the same way, like this, and then I have to magnify to what day. Yeah. So that's
Like a computer.
computer.
And if you see numbers, let's say 1 to 100,
Mhm.
how would you display those?
I see them as very large, and they go kind of more straight. So the graph for the days and the months are like this to infinity, and then the numbers are sort of like straight. So
Do they get smaller?
Yes,
as
there's a
you-
perspective, yes.
Yeah.
But it's more, a straight line.
Can you move along that line?
Oh yeah, I have to,
You want
because
to
I'm
go
very
to
bad
that
at math.
number, that number?
Yeah.
Or if you add or subtract, because my number line is
Oh,
kind of like my
subtract.
alphabet trail, and the numbers have their different colors, it's also upwardly sloping. But if I want to subtract, let's say I want to subtract
Mhm.
13 from
Mhm.
38 or something, then I'm in the red 30s.
Okay,
And
yeah.
I'm at the top of that, let's say, that group of red 30s, right, because it's 38. It's close to the border with the gray 40s, but
40s,
okay,
yeah, it's
38.
starting to change,
But
yeah.
then I have to sort of jump. I have to
Mhm.
kind of like jump down into the green 20s until I can land on 25. And
Okay.
that's how the subtraction happens. I think that's why I'm really slow in math.
I'm very slow in math.
I have to do these operations.
And what I learned in reading some of the material and, journals and all the amazing books that you wrote, not very many on the subject, unfortunately, even today, but,
Relatively few.
that a lot of us have difficulty in math or reading, and so for a long time I had major difficulty in math, and I didn't understand why I couldn't grasp what other people, and so for me it became, an embarrassment and being ashamed of that, because as an adult I still saw numbers. I was taught how to add, subtract, of course, divide, all of that, but I couldn't do it because I would see everything. And so it would take me much longer to, if you're like, I have $112 and I'm going to give you a 20, how much are you giving me back? Normal, I think, well, not normal, I shouldn't say that word. Other people would say, well, let me, just subtract, okay, there you go. And for me, I have to see 112 is like, one is the color 1, and then another one is sort of different because it's closer to 2. So 112, the colors kind of change, and then 2 is like bright red, and then I have to subtract 20, so that 2 is a different color because now it's below the other 2, so it changes slightly, and then 0 is always clear, of course.
Right.
So then I have to, so it takes me longer because they have personalities and they have colors, and I have to see them, and then the result, I'm not always sure, and I have to check it and double check it, and then then I'm like, okay, that's right. Which is why I use a calculator.
I loved algebra. Algebra was the most exquisite thing I've ever seen. I haven't made the necklaces yet, but I was seeing
Wow.
gel-like colors, and all of the brackets and shapes became chrome settings and bezels and white gold, and all of the numbers and letters were connected with thin filaments of platinum wire.
Oh.
And they are the most exquisite necklaces I've
Make
ever
them.
made.
Oh, wow, I'm gonna order one.
Yeah.
So in math, all of the like division symbols and multiplication symbols, do those fall in with like the letters or the numbers, or do they have their own separate kind of pathway that you were talking about, or do they not even?
For me, they have
Yes.
definitely, there's an upwardly sloping trail of numbers in their individual
Are
colors.
those in color?
Yeah.
Punctuation, division, hashtag, all of those?
Yeah, like other symbols such as like.
Oh, you mean, I see
Or
what you
even in
mean.
math, like the
No, they
division.
don't have any color. You mean something like a subtraction sign or, no, they have no color, interestingly. Yeah.
Mine are starting to. About a year ago, one day, I'm looking at the computer screen, and a period I had just typed turned into a glowing ball of red and went running all over the screen. And I thought, oh, I wondered what color you might be. The rest of them are starting now too. Do you find you have forms that are starting to?
Yeah, they change. That's what was so confusing for me, because I thought, oh, this is how it's going to be, and then no, now it changes as I've gotten older. And I do, acknowledge one of the things that I was confused by in learning more about myself with my perception was that I thought, well, shouldn't things be this way, all the time? And when they start to change, I start to question, why is it changing? But I think it's sort of, the only way that I can express it is it's kind of like the way your palate changes. You used to love pickles, and now pickles are like, pickles are all right. Now you really love like rack of lamb, you acquire a taste, So to me, I think different symbols and numbers and also tactile experiences, sounds have refined and changed my father is really, for instance, a little bit of, some of them show, is autobiographical in nature. And so when my father was working for the federal government in DC, I heard certain sounds at that time that were very different as a preteen than I did, and saw colors and images and patterns that were very different than what I see now. And our relationship also influences the way I see things when I'm with him. So when I was a kid, we used to listen to Irish folk music all the time. I used to play it in the living room, and they would all get together and play instruments. And so now when my dad sings Irish folk music or like a sea shanty, which I'll ask him to do still sometimes, I have a very synesthetically different experience than I did when I was a kid. And that's really the only way. The thing I'm fascinated about, which I'm afraid I'm going to forget to ask you, frankly, is I'm really fascinated about the writing about synesthetic characters, because I've yet to have found anything about that. And being an actress and a writer and director, having theater students and communication students that came with us to work on the show, I'm sure they would also be very, very fascinated by it.
You mean novels that have synesthetic characters?
Anything at all that you would like to share.
There are a lot of those, yeah. Nabokov, Vladimir Nabokov, who some of you may know, probably best known for his novel Lolita. One of the best writers of the 20th century, fiction writers. He himself was a synesthete. And he actually has a very beautiful description. He experienced words as having colors and textures, and he has a very beautiful description of the colored alphabet that he experiences in his autobiography, Speak Memory. And you get a sense of somebody, almost like wandering through this forest of colored letters and textured letters. And he also talks about, English was a second language for him. Native language was Russian. And he also talks a lot about how the colors shift, going from English to Russian. So but also his characters in some of his novels. He wrote a novel called The Gift, where the main character is a poet, and the poet also has these kind of very beautiful, sublime experiences of language, where he talks about, words are like, jewels in his cupped hands, and sapphires, and these, this was a way that he literally experienced words. So he has a very kind of romantic view, I would say, of his synesthesia, kind of fusing it into this character who's a wonderful poet. There's also another novel, actually a children's book, that's become very well known, called A Mango-Shaped Space. Maybe some of you know that?
I read it in grade school, and that's what got me excited about it in the first
Yeah, so
place.
what did you think of that? About a girl who experiences all kinds of synesthesia.
It made me so, I don't know, dreamy, I guess, about it. I